All right, so we're gonna give this another shot. Um, the Iran chapter. So I had this originally uploaded, but there was some audio glitches, and I was talking over a lot of the audio because although the audio was paused for me, it wasn't paused for the recording. So found that out the hard way. So this is a re-upload. Um, it is still dedicated to my good brother, Big Brother Yacht. Like I said in the original, clippers, shears, and razors for life, good brother. So Big Brother Yacht knows who he is. And so we're gonna get started. So this is Iran, and we're gonna start here with this guy, Mohammed Mossadegh. Now, who is he? We'll talk a little bit about him. He was the democratically elected leader of Iran, and back in 1951, he did something that pissed the West off. So he nationalized the oil industry in 1951. And at the time, the Iran State Oil Company was known as the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. Nowadays, you'll know that as British Petroleum. So, quick sidebar: what exactly does it mean to nationalize your industry? So, in this context, we're talking about the oil industry. So, nationalizing your oil means that a country's government takes control of the oil industry. So, instead of private corporations owning and running the oil wells, refineries, and pipelines, the government steps in and becomes the owner operator. So, this usually means the government buys out those private companies. So, be it BP, Shell, ExxonMobil, etc., so it can control how oil is produced, processed, and sold. Okay, so now the government takes that over. So, why did the US and UK strongly oppose nationalization of Iran's oil industry? Good question. So, there's a threat to British economic interests. All right. So, for a long time, the Anglo Iranian Oil Company controlled most of Iran's oil and made a lot of money from it. Meanwhile, Iran only got a small share, about 16% or less, of its own oil profits. When Iran decided to take back control of its oil, the process that we're talking about here called nationalization, it meant that the British company in the UK stood to lose a lot of money in power over Iran's resources. So that's why they don't want you to nationalize your oil or nationalize any industry. And also, so we'll say, the threat of a good example. So both governments, the US and the UK, feared that if Iran successfully nationalizes oil, other countries with valuable resources might follow suit, leading to a decline in Western influence and control over these vast resources. So that's what it's all about. If you live in the global South, to the Western world, those resources do not belong to you. They are for their companies to exploit and control. All right. They don't recognize anybody else's sovereignty but their own. And we'll see that as this presentation goes forward. So, anyways, that's the end of this quick sidebar. So I'll let you guys know that this is part of a much larger presentation. So this is the Iran chapter, but the much larger overarching presentation here is called Geopolitrickery. The subtitle, Analyzing the Transition Beyond Unipolar Hegemony to a Global Multipolar World. Because that's what's happening now. And this is, it's irreversible at this point. All right. And the US is really having a hard time coping with it. But in this presentation, we do go over the US's plan to attack 7 Muslim countries. So this is an infamous General Wesley Clark clip from Democracy Now! So long ago, where he detailed the US's plan to overthrow 7 countries in the next 5 years. And we go through all of those countries one by one. We talk about Iraq, talk about Lebanon, talk about Libya, which still breaks my heart. We talk about Sudan and Somalia, both of which are clusterfucks. Syria as well. And of course, we're talking about Iran right now. So let's continue focusing on Iran because Iran has been in the news a lot lately. So we'll go back to Mohammed Mossadegh, right? And then now we'll talk about Operation Ajax. So what was Operation Ajax? Well, Operation Ajax was the plot to overthrow the democratically elected government of Mohammed Mossadegh in Iran. All right. Now, who is behind Operation Ajax? None other than the home of freedom and democracy. All right. So declassified documents revealed CIA's role in the 1953 Iranian coup. So the Central Intelligence Agency was behind the overthrow of Iranian Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh in 1953. It's been an open secret for decades, but last week the George Washington University's National Security Archive released newly declassified documents proving it. Okay, so yeah, everybody knew about this prior to 2013, but so the West reinstalled the Shah after the coup, and I consider that coup to like be reading up on it. You learn details about Kermit Roosevelt, who I believe was FDR's grandson, CIA agent, and the way they carried it out. It sounds very similar to a modern day color revolution, um, the way it was described. But anyways, they overthrew Mossadegh. They reinstalled the Shah. He ruled with an iron fist, and yeah, he ruled for another 26 years. So at this point, Iran and Israel became the enforcers in the Middle East, which is, how the United States would like it. And I reference here the the book by Zbigniew Brzezinski, The Grand Chessboard, a very, very important political science text if you really want to understand the world and how the U.S. operates in it and views the said world. You know, and the thesis of this book is all about basically whoever controls Eurasia controls the world. And he felt it absolutely imperative that the U.S. have a beachhead in Europe that spreads eastward into Eurasia for the U.S. to control said region. So they want to dominate Eurasia. That was the thesis of the book, and that is the goal of the U.S. foreign policy. It's detailed all throughout the book. So anyways, Israel and Iran were the enforcers. So the U.S. had basically two states, two of the most important states. You have Israel, which is basically unsinkable aircraft carrier for the United States. And then you had Iran, which is also the seat of Shia Islam. And if they could have control of that. So they've had a hard on for Iran for a long time. But anyways, we'll keep going. Eventually, there was a revolution in 1979. Quick anecdote about that. So I met a woman on a plane. I don't remember where I was going. I was on my way to France or I can't remember. And her name was Azadeh. And she was sitting next to her boyfriend. We just had we were just chatting it up, the three of us. And she said a lot of people, a lot of young girls who were born in 1979, their name is Azadeh because it means freedom in Persian and Farsi. As a commemoration of the 1979 revolution. I tried this out twice, once in Dubai and again in Ottawa airport, and it checked out. I saw a woman, name was Azadeh, happened to be Persian. Asked her, "Were you born in 1979?" One time, my friend was like, "Man, why would you ask a woman that?" And I said, "I'm going somewhere with this." And she was so impressed. She was like, "Yes, actually, I was." And his mind was blown. But that was an anecdote a detail that he didn't know, but I did. That somebody who only knew about the country interested in knowing about the country would know, and that was like really impressive to her. But anyways, quick side note that wasn't implemented into the presentation. But yeah, 1979, quick anecdote about that Iranian Revolution. And so now the mullahs are in charge. Okay. So the West has been planning regime change in Iran since that 1979 revolution. They want somebody like the Shah in control that they can control or who reports to them and does their bidding for them. Right. So since 1979, we've got nonstop attempts at subversion by the West. Okay. So again, the West has been planning a regime change since the 1979 Iranian Revolution. Here are some details around the nonstop subversion attempts. So we had the embassy takeover in 1979. So on November 4th, 1979, Iranian students seized the U.S. embassy in Tehran, holding 52 American diplomats and staff hostage for 444 days. So The U.S. was a staunch supporter of the Shah, and this was in protest of that support. So in 1985 through 1987, you had the Iran-Contra scandal. So that's when senior U.S. officials under Reagan secretly sold weapons to Iran, which was under an arms embargo at the time. And they used the proceeds from the arms sales to fund right-wing rebel groups, aka the Contras in Nicaragua, okay, to undermine the Sandinista government. Then you got covert actions in the Iraq War support. So this happened from 1980 to 1988. So Iran and Iraq fought a war. The U.S. supported Iraq. They supported Saddam Hussein in that war, and they were hoping to weaken or topple the Iranian government. Now, this conflict in and of itself really does show that the supreme leader is not playing around when they talk about issuing a fatwa. That is something that the West doesn't understand or respect, but the West gave Saddam chemical weapons during that conflict. There was a lot of pressure for the Iranians to respond in kind. That was coming, a lot of pressure internally. However, because of the fatwa that was issued that said we would not have any weapons of mass destruction, Iran did not respond in kind, even though Iraq was just bombarding them with chemical weapons. So the fatwa is real, guys. You know what I mean? It's real. Even though in the West they don't respect these sorts of things, but actions speak louder than words here. And then in the 1990s, you had containment. So under Clinton, the U.S. adopted a dual containment policy against Iran and Iraq, increasing sanctions and diplomatic isolation. Covert actions continued, including funding of exile opposition groups, though more cautiously. So in Iran's case, funding exile opposition groups would probably be like MEK. Also, notice that Iraq was also targeted by these sanctions. And this was the infamous, I think it was Dianne Feinstein. Oh, no, not Dianne Feinstein. It was Madeleine Albright who said, 500,000 kids dying in Iraq due to the sanctions was worth it. So I do have that clip in the Iraq chapter. Moving on. So we have the axis of evil and aggressive planning in the 2000s. So this was under Bush. He labeled Iran part of the axis of evil, signaling a more aggressive stance. In 2006, investigative reports by Seymour Hersh in the New Yorker revealed that the Bush administration approved covert CIA options to destabilize Iran internally, supporting separate separatist movements and groups. Then you had the 2010s with the JCPOA and covert disruption. So this was under Obama. So Obama focused on diplomacy, leading to the JCPOA in 2015, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. But covert options continued, including the Stuxnet cyber attack, which was, carried out by the U.S. and Israel on Iran's nuclear program in 2010, and intelligence operations that targeted Iran scientists. So there were a lot of scientists who were being assassinated around this time. So Trump in 2018 to 2020 openly supported regime change rhetoric, withdrew from this JCPOA, and imposed maximum pressure sanctions aimed at collapsing the Iranian economy. They also assassinated General Qasem Soleimani in 2020, and that was seen as an extremely escalatory move. All right, so they want trouble with Iran the way they're moving. They have just never let up any pressure since 1979. But throughout this whole ordeal, they try to make Iran look like it's the bad guy here. Okay. So now in present day, we have strategic ambiguity and proxy warfare. So the Biden administration returned to nuclear diplomacy attempts, but has not ruled out covert or military pressure. The U.S. still funds media outlets, civil society programs, and opposition groups seen by Tehran as part of a broader destabilization agenda. And of course, they never got back into the JCPOA. I don't think that was ever the intent. So we got George Bush here, describes Iraq, Iran, and North Korea as the axis of evil, right? Because remember, the United States is the sole arbiter of who is evil and who is a democracy or not, okay? That is the rules according to the rules-based order. You got Trump, Pompeo, and Esper defending the killing of Qasem Soleimani. Iranians vow revenge. So it's like only the U.S. can just go around the world bragging about killing like government officials, and it's just okay. Now let somebody talk about this killing or an extrajudicial killing of a U.S. official. It is an outrage, right? So that's just part of like it's okay when we do it, but when you do it, it's unacceptable, right? That's the the Western / white privilege that these Western countries have. I mean, and they just flaunt it right in front of your face. Now here's a slimmed down Pompeo saying Iran must be crushed to stop Middle East war. All right, so let's listen to some folks like John McCain, Lindsey Graham, some neocons who John McCain in particular had a raging boner for Iran. He wanted a war with them so bad. And Lindsey Graham never. There's no war that Lindsey Graham doesn't want. So let's listen to what listen to some comments from them.
That old Beach Boys song, "Bomb Iran." Bomb, 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 bomb. Anyway.
Okay, so that was McCain and his infamous bomb Iran. Beach Boy rendition. So he was asked about that in this next clip. So let's hear what he has to say.
When I search John McCain on YouTube, the biggest thing that comes up is you singing "Bomb, Bomb, 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 Iran." 744,000 hits, in case you haven't checked it recently. Are you proud or embarrassed of that?
I'm proud. Look, when I'm in the company of veterans, which I was, and one of them says to me, "When are you going to send a message to Iran?" And we're joking around, I'm going to joke around. And if someone doesn't like it, my advice to them is to lighten up.
Now, anybody else, any other country, now if you had back around this day, who was like in charge, I guess, I don't know, Ahmadinejad, maybe. Now, if he said, started going around to the Beach Boys melody singing "Bomb, Bomb, Bomb the U.S., Bomb, Bomb, Bomb D.C.," that would probably be on every MSNBC, CNN, Fox News show on repeat. And they'll use it to tell you why we need to go all the way over to the other side of the planet to bomb Iran to protect ourselves, right? This is how, so it's this double standard you'll see all throughout this presentation. So let's listen to what Lindsey Graham has to say.
Any discussions with the Biden administration about this?
A bit. I want to applaud President Biden for his strong statement in support of Israel. I just got off the phone with the Israelis. Their goal is to destroy Hamas in the south and try to save as many innocent Palestinians as possible to prevent escalation north from Hezbollah. Here's my message. If Hezbollah, which is a proxy of Iran, launches a massive attack on Israel, I will consider that a threat to the state of Israel, existential in nature. I will introduce a resolution in the United States Senate to allow military action by the United States in conjunction with Israel to knock Iran out of the oil business. Iran, if you escalate this war, we're coming for you.
Are you any discussions with the Biden administration about this?
A bit.
All right, so there you have it from Lindsey Graham. Lindsey Graham talks big shit all the time. In fact, in real time, he just had a clip out about how Trump is going to open a can of whooping on Putin's ass or something like that. He just said Lindsey Graham is out of his mind. But we'll have more to say about him later. But in the next clip, we'll show Netanyahu, who for the last 30 years has been telling us that Iran is 6 months away from a nuclear weapon. For the last 30 years, he's been saying that they're 6 months away from a nuclear weapon. Let's hear what he has to say.
If not stopped, Iran could produce a nuclear weapon in a very short time. It could be a year, it could be within a few months.
They have the wherewithal, the stored up, preserved knowledge to make a bomb very quickly if they wanted to do it.
Iran is so dangerous. Weeks away from having the fissile material for an entire arsenal of nuclear bombs.
They're very close. They're 6 months away from being about 90% of having the enriched uranium for an atom bomb. Iran is gearing up to produce 25 bombs, atomic bombs a year, 250 bombs in a decade. Ladies and gentlemen, time is running out.
Iran will be capable of producing alone, without importing anything, nuclear bombs within 3 to 5 years.
If not stopped, Iran could produce a nuclear weapon in a very short time. It could be a year, it could be within a few months.
So, guys, during the viewing of that clip, I'm sure Iran got so much closer to attaining a nuclear weapon. So, the biggest threat in the Middle East, each of these 45 black dots is a U.S. military base, but Iran is the one threatening the U.S. Here's a better look at it. Look at all those U.S. bases. How dare Iran have the audacity to put its country near all these precious U.S. bases? How dare they? Now let's move on to which path to Persia. Options for a new American strategy towards Iran. So this was published in June of 2009 by the Brookings Institute. All right. It outlines detailed regime change strategies for Iran, including supporting insurgencies, creating diplomatic traps, triggering overreaction to justify intervention. That last one is the one that's very telling, and they spend a lot of time on that point in this publication. So just have a look at the table of contents. I want to draw your attention to chapter 5. Leave it to Bibi, allowing or encouraging an Israeli military strike. That is exactly what just happened, guys. This paper was written in 2009. Okay. It's like a crystal ball. Let's listen. So Brian Berletic from the New Atlas, fantastic channel. I highly encourage it. Please check it out. He does a lot of work. So he's been through this paper too. And he has some highlights. He points up some highlights. I'm going to I probably might do a separate presentation deep diving into this, but I do highlight some sections of the publication. But I'm going to let Brian Berletic offer some commentary on Which Path to Persia by the Brookings Institute. So let's listen to what he has to say.
And this is what I've pointed out in previous updates. This is purely an exercise in maintaining plausible deniability. This has always been the plan. For years and years, U.S. policy papers have talked about specifically how the U.S. can provoke a war with Iran while actually trying to appear to pursue peace. I've talked about this many times. I've cited this paper many times. 2009, Brookings Institution paper, Which Path to Persia? Options for a New American Strategy Toward Iran. And I want to go over a part that I have read many times, but I want to go over another part that I have not really focused on in the past. First, I want to read the part about how the U.S. understands Iran does not want war with the U.S., but how the U.S. can try to provoke Iran into a war anyway, and while doing so, convince the world that the U.S. wanted peace the whole time, and it was Iran that brought it upon themselves. So this is what the paper says, and the link will be in the video description. You can read it for yourself if you don't believe me. It would be far more preferable if the United States could cite an Iranian provocation as justification for airstrikes before launching them. Clearly, the more outrageous, the more deadly, and the more unprovoked the Iranian action, the better off the United States would be. Of course, it would be very difficult for the United States to goad Iran into such a provocation without the rest of the world recognizing this game, which would then undermine it. So they admit that Iran is not going to attack the U.S. unprovoked. Is not interested in war with the U.S. The U.S. needs to find some way to provoke Iran clandestinely to carry out some sort of retaliation that they can present to the world as unprovoked aggression from Iran. And then it continues. It says, one method that would have some possibility of success would be to ratchet up covert regime change operations in the hope that Tehran would retaliate overtly or even semi-overtly, which could then be portrayed as an unprovoked act of Iranian aggression. So they admit that the primary U.S. policy toward Iran is lying about the threat Iran poses to the U.S. and using that as a pretext for unprovoked war of aggression against Iran. That is what they are spelling out in black and white here. It also says, in a similar vein, any military operation against Iran would likely be very unpopular around the world and require the proper international context, both to ensure the logistical support the operation would require and to minimize the blowback from it. The best way to minimize international opprobrium and maximize support, however grudgingly or covert, is to strike only when there is widespread conviction that the Iranians were given but then rejected a superb offer, one so good that only a regime determined to acquire nuclear weapons and acquire them for the wrong reasons would turn it down. Under those circumstances, the United States or Israel could portray its operations as taken in sorrow, not anger, and at least some in the international community would conclude that the Iranians brought it on themselves, that is in quotation marks, by refusing a very good deal. So they admit that they would be lying to the international community. They deliberately provoked a war with Iran, but they will spin it to blame Iran for the war and make it out as if the U.S. and Israel had no choice when they were the ones who provoked the war in the first place. That is U.S. foreign policy, signed and dated and on the internet for everyone to see. These think tanks, which produce U.S. foreign and domestic policy, these think tanks are funded by corporations. These policy papers are taken by lawyers, turned into bills, which are then given to lobbyists to bring to Washington to get signed and rubber stamped. That is how U.S. foreign and domestic policy is actually developed. And this is what they were writing in 2009, and this is something that they have been pursuing ever since. And so this deal that they were talking about is the Iran nuclear deal, which followed shortly after this paper was published. It was signed under the Obama administration. They had no intention, the U.S. had no intention of ever honoring it under the Trump administration. Trump unilaterally withdrew from it, accused Iran of violating it, and now we see the Biden administration, which vowed to return to the Iran nuclear deal, never going back to it. That was just to maintain the illusion that there is no continuity of agenda, that each presidential administration has agency. Now, these foreign policy objectives are pursued regardless of who is in the White House, regardless of who is in Congress. It went from the Obama administration to the Trump administration to the Biden administration, but the agenda continued moving forward regardless. And it continues to do so to this day. And this is what I've pointed out in previous updates. This is purely an exercise in maintaining plausible deniability.
So that was Brian Berletic. So let's actually look at some excerpts from Which Path to Persia. I hope you appreciated that analysis. He's spot on. And we'll go and look at some excerpts. So right here, an air campaign against Iran could badly undermine U.S. efforts to employ any other strategy to deal with Tehran. Airstrikes against Iran could prove so unpopular around the globe, especially if the United States cannot point to some egregious Iranian action as a provocation. Here's chapter 5. Again, I can't get over this title, Leave It to BB, allowing or encouraging an Israeli military strike, which is exactly what happened. We'll get into it. But also check out this part. For that reason, it would be far more preferable if the United States could cite an Iranian provocation as justification for the airstrikes before launching them. Clearly, the more outrageous, the more deadly, and the more unprovoked the Iranian action, the better off the United States would be. Of course, it would be very difficult for the United States to goad Iran into such a provocation without the rest of the world recognizing this game, which would then undermine it. One method that would have some possibility of success would be to ratchet up covert regime efforts, which we know happened under Bush and Obama, in the hope that Tehran would retaliate overtly or even semi-overtly, which could then be portrayed as, and I'm sure that's going to say, as a means for us to paint ourselves as the victim so then we can attack. That's exactly what they're setting up here. So what you're saying here is U.S. officials just saying, hey, we want to attack Iran, but we want the rest of the world to think that we're not outright attacking them, that Iran had a provocation and we're responding to it. Okay, because remember, the West controls the media narrative. Okay, and well, especially Westerners. Westerners don't watch anything but Western media. They only get one perspective, so they have no clue about anything that's going on around the world. But they'll then present in their media that, hey, Iran did this, Iran did that, and we're the victim. We have to defend ourselves. Okay, this is what they're setting up here, and they're telling you this. They're telling you this. Now, before we deep dive further into this publication, let's talk about this book, Manufactured Crisis: The Untold Story of the Iran Nuclear Scare. This is by Gareth Porter. Fantastic book. I highly recommend this book. Very important political science read. The thesis is the narrative that Iran has been seeking nuclear weapons is false and deliberately constructed by the U.S., Israel, and its allies. So basically the West, right? And some of the key takeaways: under the IAEA, every nation is allowed to have a civilian nuclear program, including Iran. The U.S. is demanding that Iran get rid of its civilian nuclear program via extra legal means, i.e., because we say so. So basically, the United States, in full, we are the world's slave master energy that it always tends to give. They're trying to force Iran to agree to an extra legal stipulation that only the U.S. is enforcing, because dictator of the world, U.S. says so. All right. And we'll get into what the IAEA says about civilian nuclear programs. So enter the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, aka the JCPOA. And that came about under Obama. So another quick sidebar. We're going to talk about non-proliferation of nuclear weapons, the NPT. All right. And take a look at this. So this is Article 4. Now look at Part 1. Nothing in this treaty shall be interpreted as affecting the inalienable right of all parties to the treaty to develop, research, production, and use of nuclear energy for peaceful purposes without discrimination and in conformity with Article 1 and 2 of this treaty. So you have an inalienable right to develop, research, production, and use of nuclear energy for peaceful purposes. You're allowed to do that. But according to the United States, Iran does not get that privilege because the U.S. says so. Part 2, all parties to the treaty undertake to facilitate and have the right to participate in the fullest possible exchange of equipment, materials, and scientific technological information for the peaceful uses of nuclear energy. All right, so all parties have the right to participate in and exchange in equipment and materials and scientific technology. They can exchange this stuff for the peaceful use of nuclear energy. All right, now remember, the Grand Ayatollah issued a fatwa that we know is taken seriously. Let's listen to what Dr. John Mearsheimer has to say about the JCPOA. This is on Breaking Points. Let's listen to what he has to say.
Is under the Obama administration, the Israel lobby did take one significant blow, which was the successful negotiation of the JCPOA. What do you think created the conditions that made that that deal possible? Even though Bibi Netanyahu came here and preached to Congress, you had a robust debate, a huge propaganda effort to try to kill that deal, and it was able to ultimately go through. So, what do you think created that possibility?
Well, I think that Obama fully understood that the lobby was powerful, but nevertheless, its policies were not good for the United States. I think he understood that Israel is an albatross around their neck. He would never say that publicly, but I'm fully confident that he understood that. And he understood that getting a deal with Iran made sense. And he worked overtime to fashion a deal. And he had the benefit that he had a number of European countries, the French, the British, and the Germans, plus the Russians, plus the Chinese on his side. And he was able to barely push through the JCPOA, the nuclear agreement with Iran. Mm-hmm. He took tremendous heat along the way from the Israelis and from the lobby. And then when Trump came to power in 2017, January 2017, he made it clear that he was going to do away with the JCPOA. And of course, in 2018, the summer of 2018, he walked away from it. And then you want to remember that when we started dealing with this issue again, when the Trump administration started dealing with this issue again a few months ago, Steve Witkoff and Trump himself were talking about working out a deal that looked like the JCPOA. Mm-hmm. The lobby then moved in, unsurprisingly, and the lobby made it clear to Witkoff and to Trump that there was not going to be a deal like the JCPOA. And Witkoff and Trump both did 180-degree turns, said the Iranians cannot have any nuclear enrichment at all, which was allowed in the original JCPOA. And the Iranians said that was unacceptable. And here we are today. So what is the bottom line? The bottom line is that common sense won a victory during the Obama period, but that was quickly overturned. That victory was quickly overturned by Trump. And then it looked like Trump might win a victory for common sense this time, and it was quickly overturned by the lobby. Yeah. So you see the power of the lobby at every turn. It's almost impossible for a president to have any maneuver room when it comes to dealing with issues that are dear to Israel's heart.
There you go. Well, sir, thank you very much for joining us. We always appreciate it.
Is under the Obama administration that...
All right, two things to say about Dr. Mearsheimer's comments. So number one, I do not believe that Obama entered the JCPOA in good faith. In fact, I think which path to Persia, I think that was the first, let's do diplomatic relations with Iran and then blame them for breaching the deal. I think that's what the JCPOA was. They were always going to renege on that, in my opinion. And also, one anecdote was that about the JCPOA was even once it was enforced, they tried to retroactively make it about also Iran getting rid of its ballistic missile program, which is the only way it has to defend itself. Like, it doesn't have an air force at all, so the only way they can defend themselves is with their missiles. So basically, again, it shows in good faith. It's like they just want you to disarm because they want to eventually go in and overthrow you. You know, you can never trust these folks. You cannot trust the West. They do not operate in good faith. Okay. So moving on to the JCPOA, let's talk about the timeline. So 2015, the JCPOA was finalized. So July 14th, 2015, the JCPOA is signed in Vienna. After years of negotiations, Iran and the P5+1 agreed to the full JCPOA. Fast forward to 2016, we have the implementation. So January 16th, 2016, implementation day, the IAEA verifies Iran's compliance and international nuclear relations sanctions are lifted. Next year, 2017, already rising tensions. So October 13th, 2017, Trump's in office now, and he refused to recertify the deal under the U.S. Iran Nuclear Agreement Review Act, INARA, though he does not withdraw from the JCPOA just yet. Okay, this was the precursor. Fast forward to 2018, we have full U.S. withdrawal. So the U.S. withdraws. President Trump announces unilateral U.S. withdrawal from the JCPOA and begins reimposing sanctions on Iran. So again, once again, the U.S. showing that it's non-agreement capable. You cannot make agreements with the United States. It always reneges. Since the days of the First Nations, you cannot make deals with the United States government. So I remember this. This was the press conference that Netanyahu put on with all those CDs in the back and all those binders, and that's supposed to be proof that, you know, the JCPOA, Iran didn't adhere to it. So of course, no proof, just, you know, the media. Netanyahu says it, Trump repeats it. So therefore, CNN, MSNBC, Fox News repeats it, and you know, it becomes the narrative. It becomes, you know, America fact. Just because, you know, America says it and this media outlets reports it, that's what becomes fact for most people in the country. Because again, this is a nation full of idiots and non-critical thinkers. So anyways, here's the White House press conference. Press release, not press conference. So Donald Trump is ending the United States participation in the unacceptable Iran deal, May 8th, 2018. The Iran deal was one of the worst and most one-sided transactions the United States has ever entered into, according to President Donald Trump says. So, yeah, the U.S. withdrawals. So now Iran stayed in the deal. They stayed in the deal. They still adhered to the stipulations of the JCPOA with hopes that the Europeans would you know, relieve the sanctions. But I think the Europeans were playing bad cop. I mean, good cop here. I don't think they ever had any intention of I don't think they had any intention of ever reducing the sanctions on their end. So in 2019, 2020, Iran rolls back compliance. In response to the U.S. exit and European failure to offset sanctions, Iran begins reducing its JCPOA commitments. All right, and they did that gradually from 2019 to 2020. You know, so they tried. They put in an effort, even when it wasn't fair for them. It wasn't even a deal anymore because they were sanctioned again, which was they still stayed in the deal and still adhered to and still complied with it. So let's listen to what two of the elders, Garland Nixon and Ajamu Baraka, have to say about the JCPOA. And again, the West cannot be trusted. Cannot be trusted. All right, they are non-agreement capable. Let's listen to what these gentlemen have to say.
Here you have this joint comprehensive program of action that was in some ways a very intrusive agreement in terms of Iranian sovereignty, where they agreed to have this daily inspections by the International Atomic Energy Agency, cameras throughout their nuclear facilities, and to voluntarily hold the enrichment of uranium to 3.67%. This is all part of their commitment to a energy mix like other nations are involved in to satisfy their energy needs in their country. So nuclear power is part of that mix. Everything was in place. So as you said, it was abrogated by the United States of America. From the very beginning, they were reluctant to live up to their side of the bargain in terms of completely eliminating all of the sanctions. And then finally, the Trump administration basically said, let's quit playing with this and just eliminate it. And so that's what happened. Now there's this new so-called indirect conversations. But the question has to be this: what is the basis of a conversation? If you had an agreement in which you had intrusive monitoring, when you had and all of the evidence suggests, including the U.S. intelligence agencies, have said that there was no evidence to suggest there was any deviation from the agreement. That was also verified again by the International Atomic Energy Agency that there was no deviation of uranium to a weapons program, et cetera, et cetera. It was clean. So what is there to talk about now? What is the basis? You go back to that as a foundation, those agreements. And what was the issue that caused the Trump administration to eliminate or to abrogate the agreement? Well, what they did was they were concerned about Iranian politics and other military capabilities, including their ballistic missile systems. The Iranians understanding the region, understanding the objective agenda of Israel, the Israeli fascist regime, that if they didn't have the capability, the ability to protect themselves, to defend themselves, then they would be open to the constant aggression that other nations, other states have experienced in the region. Look, before they finally overthrew the government in Syria, the Israelis were able to invade their airspace at will. Okay, they would have loved to put the Iranians in the same position. The Bashar al-Assad could not retaliate when they were attacked by the Israelis, but the Iranians could. So they were concerned about, they wanted to undermine the ability of the Iranians to defend themselves. Well, the Trump administration says today that, okay, we're not going to talk about ballistic missiles. The focus is only on the nuclear program. Well, then again, I raised the question to talk about what aspect. You want to go back to the original agreement? Okay, that could be a basis. But, if you're not talking about that, what in fact are you talking about? This is what I think they're talking about, Garland. They're setting up the scenario for the real possibility of a military assault. They want the talks to collapse. When Trump says that Iran has to dismantle its nuclear program, what is that? What kind of? Look, they couldn't even agree to that. My reading of what's happening in Iran is that the Iranian authorities, the current president, the prime minister, there's no way they can sell that kind of agreement to the Iranian people. The Iranian people are proud people, and they had to suck it up a lot with the first agreement. And now you're going to come back and say you're going to dismantle your program because these people 8,000 miles away say that you should? No, it's not going to happen. So it is a very worrying situation, Garland, because on one hand you have many people believe that something can be worked out, there can be some kind of agreement. On the other hand, you have people who don't believe that this is an authentic attempt to try to resolve the differences. I tend to fall on the side of the people who are very, very skeptical of what's unfolding in Iran with these so-called indirect talks.
I'm with you. I'm at this point when you just looking at Gaza alone, when you understand the brutality and the brutal nature and the vicious nature of the ruling elite of the U.S., the only thing they understand is force. The positive thing for Iran is that they understand that, and they have developed a defensive capability strong enough to deter the U.S. empire. So I think that if anything stops the imperialists from attacking Iran, it will be Iran's ability to deter them and to strike back, because that's the only thing they really understand. Because if you make a deal with them, I mean, Iran has to look over at Libya, and they said, Libya, get rid of your nuclear program. They got rid of their nuclear program. They attacked them. Syria, get rid of your chemical weapons. They got rid of their chemical weapons. They attacked them. But look at North Korea. North Korea developed their if we are honest about it, the reason that North Korea is standing today and still able to be an independent and sovereign nation, and they're allying with China and Russia and BRICS and et cetera, is because they have a nuclear weapons program. Now, I'm not saying that Iran should, because they have made a decision based on their morals that they don't want one. But they have developed the capability to adequately defend themselves. And to me, that's the only thing that the imperialists understand. And Abraham Traore right now, if it wasn't for the fact that there are people from other countries and other people coming in from around Africa, I understand there's people in the street saying, we'll defend him with our lives. The physical defense of him is the only thing that keeps him going. And I think that's the state, to me, it's very positive for me to look at Iran and see them have their missile. I'm happy to see Iran's missile defense and air defense and increase their abilities to defend themselves, because I know they're not an offensive power. But without that defensive capability, the U.S. empire would jump on them without a second thought.
All nations have. Here you have this.
All right. I hope you guys enjoyed that clip. So there's a couple things I want to touch on. And Ajama Baraka is right. Like the intrusiveness of the IAEA regime, like daily inspections, cameras everywhere. You know what I mean? So like you're just open, like just from a sovereignty standpoint, and you have a civilian nuclear program, but you're just being accused and smeared incessantly, and so that you just submit and give the West, the option to just like watch you. They have cameras everywhere in their nuclear installations, just so your Western masters can just watch you and make sure you're behaving. Iran was never in noncompliance. They were never found to be in noncompliance, and the IAEA never said that they were not in compliance. And so the U.S. again tried to make them in noncompliance. Will say, well, your ballistic missiles, you got to make that part of the deal too, retroactively. After you already agreed to the deal, now you want to change the terms and make ballistic missiles a part of it. It's the U.S. just moves in with such energy as do what we say or else. They always move under threat. Either we'll sanction you, we'll tariff you, or we'll bomb you. It's never really a negotiation. It's just do what we say or else. So, anyways, that's the end of this sidebar. So we're gonna move on to some provocations. And this guy, Qasem Soleimani, he was murdered in 2020. Gotta update that. And so ex-Intel chief confirms Israel's role in Soleimani killing. And you saw this one. This is Pompeo defending the killing of Soleimani. And here's Trump. Israel was part of the plans to kill Qasem Soleimani, but backed out at the last minute. Okay, whatever. So in 2022, you had a failed color revolution. So here we go with the National Endowment for Democracy. Anytime you see anything NED, you need to be thinking color revolution. Okay, so here they go for coverage of the rising protests in Iran following the killing of Mahsa Amini. Follow NED grantee IranRights.org or _org and subscribe to their newsletter. So this is where a lot of your American taxpayer money goes. Defense, a lot of stuff that gets earmarked for defense is really earmarked for things like this, the soft power. Okay, so NED, they go into your country, set up like nonprofit organizations, set up this, set up that, set up schools, set up, you know what I mean? Then they brainwash people and pay people, bribe them into, hey guys, here's some signs, go out and protest, go out and do this and do that and demand this, or and put a lot of pressure. We'll do a deep dive into these color revolutions because they don't even really work anymore. Everybody's hip to them now. So they tried one in Iran in 2022, then did not work out. Then in 2024, you had the Kerman attacks by ISIS-K. So the U.S. warned Iran that ISIS-K was preparing attacks ahead of deadly Kerman blasts. Okay. Very interesting relationship between U.S. and ISIS, I'll tell you that. Then in 2024, you have Israeli bombing the Iranian consulate in Damascus, which is an outright declaration of war. All right, so Iran says it reserves the right to respond decisively to Israeli aggression. All right, so let's take a look at this. Let's take a look at international law and embassies. So this right here is the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties. 1969, this was drafted, Vienna Convention. All right. So it talks about consular relations, and it codifies their protection in law. All right. So embassies, consulates are sovereign territory. All right. Under international law, embassies are treated as extensions of the territory of the country they represent, not the country hosting them. Okay. So the Iranian consulate in Damascus is an extension of Iranian territory. It is not Syrian territory. Okay. It's just sitting on Syrian territory, but it's considered Iranian territory. Just like the U.S., any U.S. embassy or consulate in any other country is considered U.S. sovereign territory. Okay. Inviolability. Embassies are considered inviolable. Hope I'm pronouncing that right. I'm having a hard time pronouncing that. Under international law, meaning that the host country cannot enter an embassy without the permission of the head of the diplomatic mission. An attack on an embassy is an attack on that country. That's what it is. All right, so the end of this quick sidebar. So let's go back to Iran's response. All right, so we had Operation True Promise. So remember, Israel bombed Iran's consulate in Damascus on April 1st, 2024. It killed senior IRGC personnel and 2 generals. Like I said, it's okay for the West to just extrajudicially kill military or government officials of other countries. They just do it. but they'll become apoplectic at just the thought of somebody else. Somebody said they're going to kill us. Then they get apoplectic. It's remarkable. All right. So remember these two. All right. Trump said, hey, Pompeo, Esper, they all defended killing Soleimani, and the Iranians vowed revenge. So what did that look like? So that was Operation True Promise. All right. So Operation True Promise. Why and how did Iran launch a historic attack on Israel? Iran has just launched the largest ever drone strike in the world and the biggest missile attack in its history. That wasn't Operation True Promise one, or maybe it was. But anyways, Iran launched over 300 projectiles from its territory targeting Israeli military installations. And Iran also launched missiles at the U.S. forces stationed in Iraq, particularly the Al-Assad Air Base. And reportedly there was another one in Erbil, but I couldn't get a lot of details on that strike. Also, we got a little preview of something. So look at these headlines. 7 U.S. personnel injured in Monday rocket attack at Al-Assad Air Base in Iraq, including 2 evacuated for further care. U.S. personnel injured in missile attack on Al-Assad Air Base in Iraq. Americans injured in attacks on U.S. Air Base in Iraq. Like, to me, it's just a preview of the fact that U.S. air defenses were pretty weak, right? They knew a lot of these were coming. So the one at Al-Assad, I know the Persians let them know. They're like, the Iranians are like, listen, we're going to target this air base, get your air defense ready, evacuate your personnel, but we got to do something, right? It was one of those, and they did another one too at the Al-Udeid Air Base. We'll cover later in Qatar very recently, where it was like a performative strike, and but some missiles still hit. So really this was a preview to me that U.S. air defenses were not what they were cracked up to be, and we saw that for sure once we get to Ukraine. We'll talk about Ukraine another time. But anyways, let's listen to what some folks have to say about this. Let's listen to David Cameron. All right. So let's listen to him. Let's listen to what he has to say about how Iran responded to Israel bombing its consulate in Damascus. All right. So this is Cameron's response to True Promise 1.
Is it bad judgment or good judgment to hit Iranian sovereign territory in Damascus?
Look, that's something the Israelis decided to do. We haven't made a... I know. Well, I'll answer the question, which is I can completely understand the frustration the Israelis feel when they look at the Iranian Revolutionary Guard and they look at the terrible things that they have done all over the world, including the support they give to Hamas. And of course, Hamas were responsible for October the 7th, and that is where all of this begins. So you can completely understand the frustration.
Yeah, but what about Iran's frustration at part of its sovereign territory being flattened?
Well, I would argue there is a massive degree of difference between what Israel did in Damascus and, as I said, 301 weapons being launched by the state of Iran at the state of Israel. For the first time, a state-on-state attack. 101 ballistic missiles, 36 cruise missiles, 185 drones. That is a degree of difference. Yeah. And I think a reckless and dangerous thing for Iran to have done. And I think the whole world can see all these countries that have somehow wondered, well, what is the true nature of Iran? It's there in black and white.
What would Britain do if a hostile nation flattened one of our consulates?
Well, we would take the very strong action.
And Iran would say that that's what they did?
Well, what they did, as I said, was a massive attack.
So they were right to respond, but they overreacted, is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying is that the attack they carried out was on a very large scale, much bigger than people expected.
They have a right to respond?
Well, countries have a right to respond when they feel they've suffered an aggression. Of course they do. But look at the scale of that response. Had those weapons not been shot down,
respond, but they just overreacted.
There could have been thousands of casualties, including civilian casualties. I think that's a really important point to take into account.
Funny how Cameron, during the genocide, he gives a damn about civilian casualties. Don't give a damn about your casualties in the West Bank or Gaza Strip, though. They had the audacity to say some shit like that. Also, to Cameron, of course, the Israelis are justified in attacking the Iranian consulate. You know what I mean? So he was saying, well, I just look at the fact that they have the mullahs in charge and this, and like, shut the fuck up, dude. And so like, he's like, basically, Iran's response is too much because, so what's too much? So they sent 300 drones. So what was the appropriate amount of drones, Mr. Cameron? What was the appropriate amount? Should they have sent 50? Should they have sent 40? What would have been the cutoff for it to not be too much of a response for you? You know what I mean? So the thing is, they want to have the monopoly on violence, basically. They want to be able to destroy you, hit you, drop bombs and missiles on you and launch missiles at you without you being able to retaliate. You know what I mean? They want a monopoly on violence, basically, is what they want. So, I mean, it was so much cope in this, you know what I mean? And then he even says, "Lo, if somebody bombed our consulate, then we would respond very strongly." Well, she's like, "Well, doesn't Iran have the right to respond strongly?" But he's like, "Well, that was an excessive response." It's just ridiculous. I mean, they tie themselves in pretzels, these folks, trying to justify like their monopoly on violence, like why they can just bomb anybody willy-nilly, and then when people retaliate, all of a sudden they become the victim and shit. So here's another clip of some of Biden's
whole
State
world
Department
acknowledges that this was an Israeli aggression on the capital of Iran. But suppose, when you develop the proper information to say that Israel was behind this aggression on the Iranian capital, it is within Iran's right to defend itself.
I'm not going to speculate on this, Saeed. I don't have an update or an assessment to offer for you as it relates to attribution.
Okay.
And so I will just leave it at that.
Okay. In principle, as a sovereign nation, does Iran have the right to defend itself?
Saeed,
it's a simple question. Does Iran, as a sovereign nation, as any other nation, does it have the right to defend itself?
Iran is a regime that time and time again, since 1979, has been the largest and greatest exporter of terrorism, not just in the Middle East, but broadly. And it has a clear track record of not just suppressing its own people, but also funding, promoting, encouraging malign, destabilizing actions across the region. And our opinion and point of view on the Iranian regime is quite clear, and we will not hesitate to not just stand with our allies and partners when it comes to defending against threats from Iran, but also taking appropriate action from the United States as it stands.
So you're saying that the nature of the Iranian regime strips it of the right to defend itself and to defend its sovereignty.
I just don't have any assessment to offer on this.
No, you just said that.
I don't have any assessment to offer on this incident. I don't have any assessment on attribution.
Let me ask you something.
Like
you talked.
Of course, Israel has the right to defend itself, as any nation does. In terms of what Israel's response will be, of course, there must be consequences for Iran for this attack. We've made clear that there must be consequences. I'm not going to get into what those consequences are today.
Whole world.
So what you just saw here was remarkable. All right. So at the top here, I forget this guy's name, the Indian guy. So he could not bring himself to say that Iran has the right to defend itself after Israel started this. Israel started this, right? It started this skirmish by bombing the Iranian consulate in Damascus. All right. He can't bring himself to say that Iran has the right to defend itself. Basically, what he's saying is, well, Iran is not a democracy. Iran is this, Iran is that. So basically he's saying because of the nature of Iran's government, he can't basically say that they have the right to defend themselves. Then you have Matt Miller in the bottom just saying flat out, every country has the right to defend itself. Israel has the right to defend itself. You know what I mean? Just like any other country. And then he says that Israel is going to retaliate for Iran retaliating against Israel bombing its consulate in Damascus. It makes no sense, guys. So this is what's going on. So look at this. New York Times, Israel bombed an Iranian embassy complex. Is that allowed? Look at this. Check out the highlighted. Israel can likely argue that its actions did not violate international law's protection for diplomatic missions, experts say. You can't make this shit up, y'all. The New York Times jumping through hoops to justify the Israel bombing a consulate. It's totally remarkable. Now we just saw the Vienna Convention. You just saw the language. You can look it up yourself and see the language about what it says about embassies and consulates. But this is what the New York Times publishes. I have another presentation for you guys. And I'll put this up at some point. It's called "The West is Always the Victim. Perpetual Claims of Victimhood While Clearly Being the Aggressor." Happens all the time. They give me ammo every fucking day for this presentation, I swear. Take a look at this. So the House voted to condemn Iran's unprecedented drone and missile attack on Israel and fully support Israel's right to respond to this aggression through military, diplomatic, economic, and other necessary means. So the person who quote tweeted this, "Austerity is theft." Nice handle. Israel bombed a fucking Iranian consular building connected to an embassy in Damascus, Syria, assassinating 7. Iran responded with a coordinated and completely telegraphed symbolic retaliation that only hit a bunch of vacant structures at 2 desert airfields and killed nobody. But the House voted 404 to 14 to condemn Iran's unprecedented drone and missile attack on Israel. Israel, the victim of everything. Check this out. During the UN Security Council meeting on Tuesday, April 2nd, the U.S. and its European allies, the UK and France, failed to condemn the Israeli airstrike on the Iranian consulate mission in Damascus a day earlier, in which 13 people were killed. In the Security Council meeting, which was called by Russia following Iran's request, representatives of France and the UK refused to acknowledge the Israeli role in the attacks and rather blamed Iran for provoking regional escalation. The U.S. Representative Robert Wood also refused to condemn Israel and instead warned Iran against any further escalation. So again, we do nothing wrong in the West. And when Israel bombs anybody, they bombed the consulate, they bombed the embassy in Damascus. You have the U.S., UK, France saying nothing to see here. We're not condemning Israel. Oh, Iran, you just need to stop, whatever. They just got blamed for provoking the escalation. You bombed our consulate. What the hell? I mean, this is how the West operates. So Iran's response continues. So we'll talk about this in the next one. So we'll talk about Operation True Promise 2. But real quick, let's just do this. So in late July, September 2024, Israel reportedly assassinated a bunch of prominent figures. So they assassinated Ismail Haniyeh of Hamas, Hassan Nasrallah of Hezbollah, and Abbas Nefourshan of IRGC commander in Tehran. So this prompted another retaliation from Iran. And you have here, Iran vows revenge for top IRGC officer killed in Beirut strike that took out Nasrallah. All right. Tehran's foreign minister says horrible crime would not go unanswered, threatens diplomatic and legal steps. Vice president says Iran will choose time and place for response. Okay. So Operation True Promise 2, Iran launched around 200 ballistic missiles targeting Israel military facilities, including Nevatim and Telenov air bases, plus Mossad HQ. But here's something I want to also point out about this. So look at this picture. See how I have retaliation highlighted? So October 25th, 2024, Israel strikes Iran in high-stakes retaliation. Israel launches retaliatory attacks on Iran. Israel begins retaliatory strikes against Iran following missile barrage targeting Israelis. So look at how they're starting the clock here. This is long after Israel bombed the consulate in Damascus, right? Iran responded with True Promise 1. Israel then kills Nasrallah, Haniyeh, and the IRGC personnel. And then, but they framed that attack as a retaliatory attack from the drone swarm that David Cameron was bitching about, which was in itself a retaliatory attack from Israel bombing the consulate. So see where they try to start the clock? They always start the clock where they can be the victim. So they want you to forget about the fact that Israel bombed the consulate, and that's what started this whole thing. They want you to start with Iran sent a swarm of 300,000 drones and missiles over to Israel, and that's what started the conflict. No, bitch, you bombed their consulate in Damascus. Again, the West is always the victim. Perpetual claims of victimhood while clearly being the aggressor. Without fail, they do this. All right. So in the next one, I'm really going to stop here. So we're going to get into Operation True Promise 3. All right. And we're going to talk about this in the next one. So anyways, hope you enjoyed the video. I'm going to upload the sources. Keep an eye out for part 2, and then eventually part 3. And that'll wrap up the Iran chapter. But I hope you enjoyed this. Please like, share, subscribe, and for more content like this. And yeah, the plan is to very irregularly post this type of content, because I have a responsibility to the community to make sure people are educated on these things. It's not just watching corporate media and thinking you're informed. This is not cutting it anymore. You know what I mean? I need everyone to be critical thinkers. I need people to think through things. I need you to get not just the Western perspective. I need you to get the global perspective. Join the global community. Hear what the rest of the folks are saying. All right. America is not the universe. All right, folks. All right. Anyways, I'm out. Talk soon.